The night I crossed a line I swore I never would. It wasn't for love, and it definitely wasn't for pleasure. It was survival, plain and simple. I needed access to an S-class pheromone profile to stabilize the genetic condition that had been quietly tearing me apart for years. And the only person in the entire Federation who had what I needed just happened to be the High Executive Officer himself, a man known for his cold precision and untouchable authority. So I made a calculated decision. I got close, took what I needed, and before I left I flipped a single coin onto his nightstand like a sarcastic tip for services rendered. I thought it was clean, invisible, the kind of move no one would ever trace back to me. But 3 months later that illusion shattered when I was cornered in a back alley behind a black market pharmacy, my stomach turning as I barely made it to a cracked concrete wall before losing whatever little I had eaten. The nausea had become a daily reality now. Something I still hadn't fully wrapped my head around, because for 26 years I had lived as an alpha, strong, controlled, untouchable, and now my body was doing something that defied everything I thought I knew about myself. I wiped my mouth, breathing hard, when a voice cut through the air above me, cold and unmistakable, asking if I was done, and I didn't need to look up to know exactly who it was. That presence, that sharp, almost frost-like scent that carried authority and danger in equal measure. There was no one else like him. Ethan Blake. I straightened slowly and forced a grin, playing it off like I always did, greeting him like an old acquaintance instead of the one man I had every reason to avoid. Well, if it isn't Director Blake, I said lightly. Long time no see. You miss me that much? But he didn't return the humor. Behind him stood a full tactical team, weapons drawn. Overkill for someone like me, and yet somehow perfectly in line with his style, his gloved hand resting near his sidearm as his eyes scanned me with unsettling precision before settling, briefly but unmistakably, on my midsection. My heartbeat skipped. I had been careful, loose clothing, minimal exposure, but nothing escaped him. You've gotten sloppy, Ryan Cole, he said, his voice low and cold. You used to pick up my scent from 3 blocks away. Now I'm right behind you, and you're still busy. Throwing up? He emphasized the last word in a way that made my pulse spike. Not just sick, not just food poisoning. I kept my expression steady, brushing it off like it meant nothing. Bad takeout, that's all, I shrugged. What? Director Blake, you planning to start caring about my diet now? He let out a quiet, humorless breath, and then without warning, he moved. Fast enough that even on my best day it would have been a challenge. Now it was impossible. I barely got my arm up before he caught it, twisted it behind my back and slammed me against the wall. A sharp crack of pain shot through my wrist, and I clenched my teeth. Easy there. Ethan, what happened to a friendly reunion? Shoo, he cut me off, and I felt it, the cold press at the back of my neck. Not fired, not even fully raised, just enough to remind me exactly who held the power here. He leaned, and slightly, his breath steady against my ear, his voice dropping into something colder, quieter, more dangerous. Finally found you, he murmured. Ryan, that $1 tip you left that night. There was a brief pause, just long enough to make my chest tighten. I accepted it, he continued softly, but I wasn't satisfied. And without thinking, my hand moved instinctively to my abdomen, not out of fear of him, but because of the quiet, undeniable truth I had been avoiding ever since that night. The consequence of my decision was no longer just mine to carry. It had become something real, something alive, and now the one person I least wanted to face had stepped back into my life at exactly the worst possible moment. They dragged me back to Federal Detention Facility 3, the kind of place people whispered about like it was less a prison and more a grave where the bodies just happened to keep breathing. Reserved for S-class offenders, the worst of the worst, and somehow I'd earned myself a front row seat again. Only this time with premium treatment. A personal interrogation by Ethan Blake himself. The irony almost made me laugh if I'd had the energy for it. The interrogation room was deliberately unheated, the cold seeping into my bones, making every breath feel sharper than it should. I was locked into a reinforced chair designed not just to restrain, but to control. Heavy cuffs around my wrists and ankles connected to a suppression system that dampened pheromones and neurological signals, the kind that punished resistance with high-voltage feedback, meaning any attempt to fight back would end in my own body betraying me. Ethan sat across from me like he had all the time in the world, methodically cleaning a handgun with slow, practiced movements. And it took me a second to recognize it, because I'd given it to him years ago as a birthday gift, a joke at the time, something symbolic between partners who trusted each other with their lives. And now here it was again, gleaming under sterile light, possibly the thing he intended to use to end mine. Ryan Cole, he finally said, glancing up at me with a look that carried more contempt than anger. 3 years on the run, and this is what you've become. I didn't bother answering right away, because honestly, he wasn't wrong. My outer jacket had been stripped off, leaving me in a thin t-shirt that did nothing against the cold, my body still shaky from earlier, a dull ache pulsing through my abdomen that I tried very hard not to acknowledge, nausea rising in waves that I forced down with clenched teeth. I've had worse days, I muttered, forcing a crooked smirk. Figured I'd come back for a visit. He let out a short, humorless laugh, like I'd just told the world's worst joke. A visit, he repeated, leaning back slightly. Who exactly are you visiting? The partner you shot and left buried under rubble? His words landed heavier than I expected, because that part wasn't entirely a lie. 3 years ago, when my genetic condition started collapsing, I knew staying would only drag him down with me. So I staged my escape, made it look like betrayal, even pulled the trigger myself to sell it. I had aimed to avoid anything critical, calculated the angle, the force, everything, but clearly not well enough, because the scar on his body told a different story, and apparently he hadn't let it go since. That was an accident, I said evenly, keeping my voice steady. Gun misfired. The reaction was immediate. His hand slammed down on the table, with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. An accident? His voice dropped, colder than before. So breaking into my residence, drugging me, and turning me into your personal one-night distraction was also an accident. For a split second, my mind blanked. Not because I didn't remember, but because I hadn't expected him to say it out loud like that. 3 months ago, I had no choice. I needed a high-concentration sample of his pheromones as a catalyst. I broke into his place planning to take blood and leave, clean and simple. But that night, everything went wrong. His system had been in a volatile state, the air thick with an overwhelming presence that hit me the second I stepped inside, and I was already unstable, already at the edge of genetic collapse. My body reacted violently, instinct overriding reason. Everything spiraled into chaos after that. Fragmented flashes of memory, heat, disorientation, the sharp pull of instinct, the sound of him saying my name like he was trying to hold on to something slipping away, and then nothing clear after that. Just the aftermath and the irreversible consequence I was now carrying. But there was no way I could admit any of it, because if I did, I wouldn't just lose whatever fragile chance I had left, I'd lose everything, including the life growing inside me. You're going to need proof for a claim like that, Director Blake, I said, meeting his gaze head-on, forcing calm into my tone. Your place is locked down tighter than a military base. How exactly would I get in? And let's be real, we're both alphas, 2 grown men. What? We just decided to wrestle for fun. His eyes narrowed slightly, something shifting behind them. Not quite doubt, not quite belief. You're an alpha? He repeated slowly, and before I could react, his hand came up, reaching behind my neck, fingers brushing against the gland area where a high-grade suppressant patch was fixed in place. My entire body tensed instantly, but the restraints held me in position. Ryan, he said quietly, his voice lowering as his fingers lingered there. Your scent has changed. My pulse spiked, but I forced myself to stay still, not to react, not to give anything away. It used to be sharp, like whiskey. He continued, leaning in slightly, his expression tightening as he took in a subtle breath. Now. There was a brief pause, a faint crease forming between his brows, confusion cutting through his usual certainty. Why does it smell like milk? The question hung in the freezing air between us, heavier than anything else he'd said so far, and for the first time since he dragged me in here, I felt something dangerously close to panic claw its way up from deep inside my chest. My heart felt like it was being trampled by 1,000 wild horses, because I knew exactly what that scent meant. It was something no suppressant patch could fully erase, no matter how advanced. The faint, unmistakable trace of an omega in early pregnancy, subtle but impossible to completely hide from someone like him. It's a new cologne, I forced out, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage despite the chaos building inside me. You wouldn't understand. Is that so? Ethan let out a cold, quiet laugh, and before I could react, his fingers tightened sharply at the back of my neck, ripping the suppression patch clean off in one swift motion. Then let me take a closer look, he said, his tone dropping. Let's see what brand this really is. Don't touch it. I snapped, panic breaking through my control as I struggled violently against the restraints. Because if he discovered that my gland had already shifted, that everything about my body had changed, it would be over, completely over. The cuffs reacted instantly to my resistance. A sharp electrical discharge surged through them with a crackling snap. The pain hit all at once, blinding, overwhelming. My vision going white as my body convulsed uncontrollably, every nerve screaming, and worse. It didn't just attack my muscles, it triggered the unstable system inside me, a deep, wrenching pain exploding through my abdomen like a brutal impact from the inside, forcing the air out of my lungs as I folded helplessly against the restraints. Cold sweat soaked through my shirt, my entire body trembling as I fought to stay conscious. Ryan. Ethan's voice cut through the haze, sharper now, no longer controlled. He hadn't expected this reaction. I could tell. The power cut off immediately, the current disappearing but leaving behind the damage it had already done. His hand came up, tapping my face with a rough urgency. Don't pass out on me. That was barely anything. But I wasn't pretending. Not this time. The pain was real, terrifyingly real. And beneath it there was something worse, a sensation that made my blood run cold, like something fragile was slipping out of place. Meds. I managed, my fingers weakly clutching at his sleeve. I need meds. What meds? His tone shifted again, suspicion cutting through the urgency. He was already noticing too much. My body temperature was dropping fast, my lips numb and cold. Genetic condition, I said, forcing the lie. Through gritted teeth, mixing just enough truth to make it believable. I need suppressants. I couldn't say what it really was. Couldn't say stabilizers for pregnancy, because that would be the end of both of us. Ethan stared at me, his gaze dark and calculating, like he was weighing something in his mind. And for a moment, I thought he might just let me suffer, let me break right here. But then he turned abruptly, moving to the side cabinet and pulling out a syringe, a military-grade emergency injector. No hesitation, no warning. He pressed it against the side of my neck and triggered it. The cold rush of the medication flooded into my bloodstream almost instantly, sharp and freezing as it spread, dulling the worst of the pain just enough for me to breathe again. I gasped, lungs dragging in air like I'd been underwater too long, every inhale shaky and uneven. He discarded the injector without a second glance and grabbed my chin, forcing my head up so I had no choice but to look at him. Ryan, he said, his voice low, rough around the edges in a way I hadn't heard before. What are you hiding from me? His eyes searched mine like he was trying to tear the answer out of me without words. I've seen your records, he continued, his grip tightening slightly. An S-Class Alpha doesn't break down from a little shock like that. There was a pause, his gaze dropping slowly, deliberately, to my abdomen, where the pain still lingered in tight, aching waves. Unless, he said, quietly, your body isn't the same anymore. I didn't respond, couldn't, because anything I said now would only make it worse. Take off your clothes, he said suddenly, straightening, his tone leaving no room for argument. For a second I thought I'd misheard him. What? You heard me, he replied flatly. Or do you want me to do it myself? Here. I stared at him, disbelief cutting through the lingering haze of pain. Ethan, have you lost your mind? I decide where, he said coldly, already stepping forward, not giving me even a second to refuse. His hand grabbed the hem of my shirt and yanked hard, fabric tearing with a sharp rip as it gave way under the force. The cool air hit my exposed skin immediately, but there was nothing vulnerable or revealing about it. My body was a map of everything I'd survived, scars layered over scars, old wounds that told stories I'd never bothered to explain, knife marks, bullet traces, burns, a history, written in damaged flesh. But he didn't care about any of that. His focus locked onto my abdomen, where a subtle curve disrupted the otherwise lean lines of my body. Easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. But his hand came forward, pressing flat against it, and my entire body tensed instinctively, trying to pull away even though there was nowhere to go. What is this? His voice wasn't steady anymore. There was something unfamiliar in it, something that sounded dangerously close to uncertainty. A mass? A tumor? He pressed down slightly, and I couldn't stop the sound that escaped me, low and strained, because the moment he did, the fragile life inside reacted, a faint, almost imperceptible movement, weak but unmistakable, and Ethan froze, completely still, like his entire world had just shifted under his feet. That moved, he said, barely above a whisper, and I closed my eyes. The last piece of control I had slipping through my fingers, because there was no denying it anymore, no escaping it. Ryan. His voice came again, rough, unsteady in a way that didn't belong to the man I knew. Are you? He hesitated, like the words themselves refused to come easily. Are you pregnant? The silence that followed felt heavier than anything else in the room, because even saying it out loud sounded impossible. An alpha carrying a child, something that shouldn't exist, something that broke every rule we had ever lived by. And yet here I was, sitting in front of him, with the truth finally exposed and nowhere left to hide. I couldn't hide it anymore, and honestly, I was too exhausted to pretend otherwise, so I lifted my head and met his gaze head on, letting every bit of defiance I had left show through. Yeah, I said, my voice hoarse but steady. That's right. I let the words hang there for a second before adding, sharper this time. If you don't believe me, go ahead and cut me open and see for yourself. Decide whether it's a monster or a miracle. The challenge wasn't smart, I knew that, but I didn't have anything left to lose. His expression darkened instantly, the tension in the room tightening like a coiled wire. About to snap. Who does it belong to? He demanded, and I could hear the assumption buried in his tone, that I'd been out there, with someone else, that I'd come back carrying proof of it just to spite him. And for some reason, that thought almost made me laugh, because if only he knew. Anyone but you. I shot back deliberately, pushing him, provoking him, because anger was safer than truth. You know how it is out there, I added, my lips curling into something bitter. In the black market. Survival comes with a price. Shut up, he snapped, and before I could react, his hand was around my throat, fingers tightening with a force that made it instantly hard to breathe. His eyes burned, not just with anger, but something deeper, something far more dangerous. Ryan, how dare you, he said, his voice shaking in a way that betrayed just how close he was to losing control. How dare you let another alpha touch you? The pressure increased, cutting off my air, my vision starting to blur at the edges. But even then, I forced a smile, because if I stopped pushing, I'd break. Director Blake, I rasped, coughing weakly as I struggled for breath. We went our separate ways. Who I sleep with has nothing to do with you. I don't allow it. He growled, the words coming out like a declaration rather than a statement, his pheromones spiking violently, filling the room with an oppressive force that pressed down on everything. You belong to me, Ryan. Even if you were dead, you'd still be mine. His grip tightened further, his control slipping completely now. Who is he? He demanded, his voice breaking into something almost unrecognizable. I'll find him. I'll make sure he pays for this. The air was gone now, completely gone, my body starting to go limp as darkness crept in. But then something else hit, something worse. The life inside me reacting to the danger, a sudden, violent shift that sent a wave of pain crashing through my abdomen, sharper than anything before, worse than the electric shock, worse than anything I'd felt in years. The sound that left me wasn't even a word, just a strained, broken breath as my body curled involuntarily. The pain ripping through me in relentless waves, and that, more than anything, snapped him back. His hand loosened suddenly, then dropped away completely as he stared at me, at my pale face, my unfocused eyes, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected, something that genuinely scared him. I collapsed forward as much as the restraints allowed, coughing violently, dragging air back into my lungs in desperate, uneven gasps. Get away. I managed through clenched teeth, sweat dripping down my back, my entire body trembling. If you're going to kill me, just do it, don't drag it out. Medic. Ethan barked suddenly, his voice sharp as it cut through the room. Get medical in here, now. Don't you dare. I snapped back immediately, forcing my head up despite the dizziness. my hand tightening around the broken shard of a small blade I'd managed to keep hidden, pressing it against the side of my neck where my pulse throbbed weakly beneath the skin. If anyone else comes in here, I swear I'll end it right in front of you. The room fell into a tense, suffocating silence. His jaw tightened, his eyes locked on the blade, calculating, weighing options. Let me go, I said, my voice lower now, but no less firm. Not happening. He replied instantly, shaking his head. In your condition, you won't make it past that door. I won't make it if I stay here either. I shot back, forcing myself to hold his gaze, because this was the only chance I had left. Ethan, listen to me. I'm not like before anymore. I'm an omega now, a secondary differentiation, and whatever this is inside me. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. It's not normal, it's killing me. That part wasn't entirely a lie. I did need him, needed his pheromones to stabilize everything. I need a high-level alpha to regulate it. I continued, my grip tightening on the blade. And right now you're the only one who can. He went still, the storm in his expression slowly settling into something colder, more controlled, more dangerous. Ryan, he said after a moment, his voice steady again. No matter who that child belongs to, the priority is keeping you alive. There was a flicker of something in his eyes then, something sharp and unforgiving. Once you're stable, he paused, and I already knew I wasn't going to like what came next. I'll deal with it myself. His gaze dropped briefly to my abdomen, something dark flashing across his face. And I'll find whoever did this to you, he added, his tone turning lethal. And make sure they regret it. I looked at him, my chest tightening in a way that had nothing to do with pain this time. Because the irony of it all was almost unbearable. You're planning to destroy yourself. I thought bitterly, but I couldn't say it, couldn't risk it, because if he knew the truth, if he realized what that night had actually led to, there was no way he'd let this continue. No way he'd allow it to exist. And worse, he'd never let me go again. The pain hit again without warning, sharper this time, tearing through me like something was being ripped apart from the inside. My vision blacked out completely as my body gave in, the blade slipping from my grasp as everything went dark. But just before I lost consciousness, I heard it, his voice, no longer controlled, no longer distant, but raw, urgent, calling my name over and over. Ryan, Ryan. And then the feeling of his arms around me, tight, unsteady, like he was afraid I might disappear if he didn't hold on hard enough. I came to with a slow, heavy awareness, like surfacing from deep water. The first thing I noticed was the sterile smell of antiseptic and the faint hum of medical equipment. The second was that I was lying on a hospital bed in what looked like the facility's medical wing, my limbs free of restraints for the first time since being brought in. But the sense of freedom was an illusion, because the moment I shifted, I felt it. The cold, rigid band around my neck. A suppression collar, the kind that tracked location, monitored vitals, and delivered an electric shock. Or worse, if triggered, I didn't need to test it to know how it worked. I exhaled slowly, forcing my breathing to steady, and then I saw him, Ethan, sitting beside the bed like he'd been there the entire time, peeling an apple with deliberate, unhurried movements, the blade gliding through the skin in one continuous strip, like he had all the patience in the world. When he noticed I was awake, he didn't say anything at first, just cut a small slice and held it out toward me, close enough that I could smell the crisp sweetness of it. Eat, he said simply. I didn't move, didn't open my mouth, just watched him carefully, every instinct still on edge. It's not poisoned, he added, as if reading my thoughts, and before I could respond, he took a bite himself, chewing slowly, the sound oddly loud in the quiet room. And then, like he was commenting on something trivial, he said, "The baby's still there." The words hit harder than anything else he could have said, my body reacting before my mind could catch up, my hand moving instinctively to my abdomen, pressing lightly as if to confirm it myself, relief and dread tangling together in a way I couldn't separate. "Why didn't you get rid of it?" I asked, my voice lower than I expected, rough from everything that had happened. He tossed the remaining apple slice back onto the plate and wiped his hands with a napkin, his expression returning to that cold, detached calm. "The doctor said your reproductive system isn't fully developed," he replied, like he was reciting a report. "The structure is unstable, too thin." His eyes lifted to meet mine, sharp and unforgiving. Forcing a termination now carries a 90% risk of hemorrhage. There was a pause, just long enough for the implication to settle in. I don't want you dying on an operating table, he added flatly. That would be too easy for you. A chill ran down my spine at the way he said it, like my death was something he wanted control over, not something he was willing to leave to chance. I swallowed, forcing down the unease creeping up my throat. So what? You're going to make me carry it to term? I asked, already knowing I wasn't going to like the answer. He didn't hesitate. You'll carry it, he said, his voice steady, almost casual, and then I'll deal with it myself. There was something dark in his eyes when he said that, something that made my stomach twist, right in front of you. He finished, and just like that, any lingering sense of relief I'd felt vanished completely, replaced by a cold, sinking dread, because I knew he meant it, every word of it. I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm, because panicking wouldn't help. Not now, not here. Ethan, I said after a moment, my tone shifting, more controlled, more deliberate. Let's make a deal. His hand paused mid-motion, the knife still resting lightly against the apple peel. I help you find the person who broke into your place. I continued, holding his gaze. And in return, you let me go, me and the baby. There was a brief silence, the kind that stretched just enough to make you second-guess yourself. Then he set the knife down slowly, his attention fully on me now. You know who it is? He asked, his voice quieter, more focused. Of course, I lied without hesitation, the words coming out smoothly, like I'd already rehearsed them. I've seen him in the black market before. Another alpha, highly skilled in disguise. You wouldn't recognize him even if he was standing right in front of you. Ethan leaned in slightly, closing the distance between us, his eyes narrowing just a fraction. Is that so? He murmured. Then tell me something. His voice dropped, softer now, but far more dangerous. Why does this person have the same eyes as you? My breath caught for a split second, and I forced myself not to react, not to give anything away, but the silence stretched just a little too long, and that was enough. His hand moved, resting lightly against my abdomen, the contact sending an involuntary tension through my body. Ryan, he said quietly, almost thoughtfully, do you really think I'm that easy to fool? My mind raced, trying to recover, trying to redirect, but he was already ahead of me. The surveillance from that night may be gone, he continued, his tone calm again, controlled. But you left behind more than enough biological evidence. My heart skipped, then started pounding harder, faster, each beat louder than the last. I've already sent it for DNA analysis, he added, watching me closely now, like he was waiting for the exact moment I'd crack. I didn't say anything, couldn't, because anything I said now would only make it worse. The results aren't back yet, he went on after a moment, almost casually, like it didn't matter. But I have time. His gaze sharpened slightly. Plenty of it. He straightened, stepping back just enough to create distance again, re-establishing control over the situation. Until then, he said, gesturing vaguely around the room. You stay here. His eyes flicked briefly to the collar around my neck. Rest. Recover. Do whatever it is you need to do. There was a faint edge to his voice now, something that hinted at what would happen if I stepped out of line. But if you try to run, he added, tapping the collar lightly with one finger, this only responds to my biometric signature. My stomach dropped slightly, already knowing where this was going. Take one step outside this room without permission, he continued, his tone almost conversational, and it will detonate. The word hung there, heavy and final. Turn that pretty head of yours into something unrecognizable. He finished, and for the first time since waking up, I felt something close to real fear settle deep in my chest, because there was no bluff in his voice, no exaggeration, just a simple, undeniable fact, and the worst part was, I believed him. I was placed under house arrest, except there was nothing domestic about it, just a different kind of cage, one where every breath I took happened under Ethan Blake's direct watch. And I had to admit, the man was insane in more ways than one, because beneath that ruthless, cold exterior and the way his words could cut like glass, he knew exactly how to take care of someone. 3 meals a day, each one perfectly balanced, high-grade nutrition tailored to my condition, and he didn't just send them in. He stood there, arms crossed or leaning casually against the wall, watching until I finished every bite like he didn't trust me not to waste it, like my body had suddenly become something he was responsible for. And then there were the pheromones. He didn't hold back at all, releasing them freely, saturating the air with that cold, grounding presence that my body reacted to without permission, because now I was like a black hole, pulling it in, craving it in a way that made me hate myself a little, especially when the instability inside me started to spike and his scent was the only thing that could calm it down. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find him there, not across the room, not turned away like before, but right beside me, one arm wrapped around me like I was something fragile, something he needed to keep close, his hand resting lightly over my abdomen, as if even in his sleep he was aware of it, aware of what was there. And there were moments, fleeting and dangerous, where it almost felt real, like none of the past had happened, like the 3 years we'd spent apart were nothing more than a bad dream, like we were just another alpha and omega pair waiting for something new to enter the world. But those moments never lasted, because reality always came crashing back in, sharp and unforgiving, reminding me that the second that DNA report came back, the second he confirmed the truth, everything would change, and not in a way I could survive. He wouldn't kill me. No, that would be too simple. He'd lock me away somewhere worse than death, somewhere I'd never escape from. And I refused to let that happen. I had to run, and the chance came sooner than I expected. A high-level Federation conference pulled him away for 3 days. At least that's what I was told. And he prepared for it like he was leaving behind a high-risk asset. Security tripled. The building sealed tight. Guards posted everywhere. Layers of surveillance, stacked on top of each other. But he underestimated one thing. I wasn't just anyone. I was a former S-class operative, and escaping impossible situations was what I did best. On the second night after he left, I made my move, prying open the ventilation panel with tools I'd improvised from whatever I could get my hands on. The collar was the real problem, but I made a calculated gamble, betting that no matter how far gone he was, Ethan wouldn't actually risk killing me. Not now. Not like this. I accessed the internal sensor through the exposed wiring, using a thin strip of metal I'd pulled from the mattress frame to disrupt the signal just enough to create a fault loop. It wouldn't last long, maybe 3 minutes at most before the system flagged it and sent an alert directly to him. 3 minutes. That was all I had. 3 minutes to get out of the building, reach the outer perimeter, and disappear into the night. Everything moved fast after that, crawling through the narrow vents, dropping down into blind spots, slipping past patrol routes I'd memorized over the last 2 days, until finally I reached the rooftop, the cold night air hitting my face as I stepped out into the open, rain pouring down in sheets, wind howling around the edges of the structure. I moved toward the edge without hesitation, calculating the drop, the angle, the current below, everything lining up perfectly, and for a brief moment, it felt like I'd actually made it, until I heard it. That voice, cutting clean through the storm like it didn't belong to the same world as everything else. Ryan. My entire body went rigid, every instinct screaming at once as I turned slowly, already knowing what I'd see before my eyes confirmed it. He was there, standing in the middle of the downpour like the storm itself couldn't touch him, black coat soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead, and in his hand, a sheet of paper that the wind tried and failed to tear away. He lifted it slightly, letting me see just enough. 100% match, he said, his voice steady despite everything. And then he smiled, not the kind of smile that carried warmth, but something sharp, almost feral. Ryan, he continued, tilting his head slightly, you've got a lot of nerve. My chest tightened, but I didn't move, didn't step back yet, because if I did, it would mean I was afraid, and I refused to give him that. You used me, he went on, his tone darkening with each word, carried my child, and still had the audacity to tell me it belonged to someone else. The paper slipped from his hand, carried away instantly by the wind as he stepped forward, closing the distance between us. So tell me, he said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. What kind of punishment do you think you deserve? I took a step back, my heel hitting the very edge of the rooftop. Nothing but open air behind me now. The drops stretching down into darkness, the sound of rushing water faint but unmistakable below. I don't owe you anything, I shouted back, my voice nearly swallowed by the storm. That shot 3 years ago. I already paid you back for that. This, I pressed a hand briefly against my abdomen, forcing the words out. This is me settling the rest. With what? He snapped, the calm gone now. Replaced by something raw and explosive, he surged forward, faster than before. Your life is mine, Ryan. Everything about you is mine, including that child. The distance between us disappeared in an instant, his hand reaching out, fingers inches from grabbing me. Get back here. Not happening. I shot back, my decision already made, because I wasn't going to live like a prisoner, wasn't going to become something he controlled, something he owned. I lifted my chin, spread my arms slightly, and in the split second before his hand could close around me, I let myself fall backward, the world tilting as gravity took over, the wind roaring past my ears as I dropped, and for just a moment, I saw him, lunging forward to the edge, half his body hanging over, as if he might follow without thinking, and on his face, for the first time since I'd ever known him, there was something I'd never seen before, something that didn't belong to a man like Ethan Blake, something raw and breaking. Ryan, he shouted, my name tearing from him like it cost him everything. And in that final moment before the darkness swallowed me whole, I felt something close to satisfaction, a bitter, fleeting kind of relief. Because even monsters could feel pain, and if that was the last thing I gave him, then maybe it was enough. The impact hit like a freight train, water slamming into my body with brutal force, knocking the air out of me as if my organs had been yanked out of place. The pain hadn't even had time to register before the freezing current surged into my nose and throat. Choking, suffocating, the canal water was foul, thick with the stench of industrial runoff, and something far worse, something decayed and rotting. It filled my senses, invaded every breath I tried to take, and then I was sinking deeper and deeper, my awareness flickering in and out like a dying signal, darkness folding over me in heavy waves, my body caught between the strange weightlessness of drifting and the crushing pull dragging me downward. Was this what dying felt like? I wondered vaguely, because there was a strange calm creeping in beneath the chaos, a quiet that dulled everything. No more running. No more pain tearing through me from the genetic instability. No more of Ethan's eyes. Those relentless, suffocating eyes that always looked like they were trying to tear me apart piece by piece. Maybe this was easier. Maybe letting go here, in the dark, was better than anything waiting for me above. And just as I started to give in, letting myself sink toward the muddy bottom, something inside me snapped violently back to life. A sharp, tearing contraction ripping through my lower abdomen, so sudden and intense it cut straight through the numbness. It wasn't like anything I'd felt before, not like the burn of a bullet wound or the cold slice of a blade. It was alive, desperate, a frantic struggle that refused to be silenced. The child inside me was fighting, reacting to the danger, to the lack of oxygen, to my body shutting down. It didn't want to die. I could feel it, the weak but relentless movement, as if it was trying to anchor itself, trying to survive even if it meant draining whatever little I had left. Damn it. The thought slipped through what little clarity I had, a string of bubbles escaping my lips as I forced my eyes open. The water around me was murky, visibility almost non-existent except for faint, distorted beams of patrol lights slicing across the surface far above. Shun, no. Ryan, get it together, I told myself. You can't drag this kid down with you. Not like this. Survival instinct roared back to life. Overwhelming the exhaustion, I bit down hard on my tongue, the sharp taste of blood flooding my mouth, the pain jolting my fading consciousness just enough. My limbs started moving again, clumsy at first, then with more purpose, pushing against the current, fighting upward, avoiding the spinning propellers of patrol drones that churned the water nearby. Every movement heavy, sluggish, like my body was working against gravity itself. I aimed for the drainage outlet along the canal wall, the only place with a chance of escape. My lungs burned, oxygen running out faster than I could compensate, each second stretching into something unbearable. Just a little further, just one more push, and then, right as my vision started to darken again, my fingers brushed against something solid, rough stone, slick with water and algae. I latched onto it instantly, nails scraping, breaking as I forced my grip tighter, pulling myself up inch by inch, muscles screaming in protest. until finally I dragged myself out of the water and onto the edge of the drainage ledge, coughing violently as I expelled water from my lungs. My entire body shaking uncontrollably as I lay there on the cold, moss-covered concrete. Gasping for air like I'd just been reborn, my hand moved instinctively to my abdomen, pressing lightly. Checking, still there, still alive. You're stubborn as hell, I muttered under my breath, my vision still blurry as I stared up at the gray, storm-filled sky above. And then the sound hit. Sirens, loud, piercing, echoing across the entire sector. The whole Federal Zone 3 was being locked down, sealed tight. He'd done it. Ethan had lost it completely. I could feel it even from here. That overwhelming presence spreading through the air like a net, his pheromones laced with something sharp and relentless, searching, hunting, tearing through the city with terrifying precision. He wasn't going to stop, not until he found me. I forced myself to sit up despite the protest from every part of my body. Time was running out. Every second I stayed still was another second closer to being caught. I had to move, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how close I was to collapsing, because stopping now meant everything I'd fought for would be meaningless, and I wasn't about to let that happen. I performed a crude surgery on myself. No anesthesia, no proper tools, just whatever I could find in the wrecked auto shop I'd crawled into after dragging myself out of the canal. When I fell, a jagged piece of submerged metal had torn into my right leg, splitting it open deep enough that I'd seen bone flash white beneath blood and river filth. If I left it untreated, infection would finish what the fall hadn't, so I had no choice. I tore a strip of cloth from an old rag, shoved it between my teeth, and got to work. The sound that left me was muffled, strangled. My jaw clenched so hard it felt like it might crack. Cold sweat poured down my back. Tears blurred my vision no matter how hard I tried to focus. It hurt, a deep, blinding kind of pain that radiated up my spine and made my hands shake. Every movement deliberate, forced. I cleaned what I could, stitched what I had to, the crude needle biting through skin again and again until my fingers went numb. All the while one thought looped in my head like a curse. This was his fault. All of it. Ethan Blake. When I finally finished, I slumped back against a pile of discarded tires, breathing hard, my body trembling from exhaustion and pain. I grabbed a bottle of cheap liquor from a nearby workbench and took a long, burning swallow, letting it scorch its way down my throat. Anything to dull the edge. The old television mounted in the corner crackled to life with an emergency broadcast, the screen flickering as a stern-faced anchor delivered the news. The High Executive Officer of the Federation has issued a citywide red alert warrant. All exits sealed, search operations authorized at maximum level. My face appeared on the screen next, a photo from 3 years ago. Clean uniform, sharp eyes, the kind of presence that belonged to someone in control, someone powerful. It almost felt like I was looking at a stranger, because now I was nothing like that man. Just a soaked, bleeding fugitive hiding in a pile of scrap, carrying the child of the very person hunting me down. How did it come to this? I muttered under my breath, a bitter smile tugging at my lips as I rolled a coin. Between my fingers, the same coin I'd left behind that night. Somehow I'd taken it with me without realizing. Maybe some part of me thought it would bring luck, or maybe it was just a reminder of how badly everything had gone. Then suddenly, the sound of rain outside stopped, not gradually, but all at once, like the world had been muted. The entire shop fell into an eerie silence. No footsteps, no sirens, nothing. Just that scent, cold and unmistakable, like frozen earth after a storm, pressing down on me from every direction, suffocating. He was here, faster than I expected. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh, flipping the coin once before catching it in my palm. No more running. The game was over. The garage door creaked open slowly. No dramatic entrance, no squad behind him. Just one man stepping into the dim light, his coat soaked, clinging to his frame, outlining the tension in his body, water dripping from his hair, tracing down his pale face. His eyes locked onto me, burning with something intense and unyielding. Ethan Blake looked worse than I did, and somehow that made it worse. We stood there in silence, separated by rusted metal and the smell of oil, neither of us speaking at first. "How'd you find me?" I asked finally, breaking the stillness. He didn't answer, just started walking toward me, slow, deliberate steps that echoed too loudly in the quiet space. When he got within a few yards, I raised the screwdriver I'd been using, pointing it straight at him. "Don't come any closer," I warned, my voice steady despite everything. "I'm not exactly stable right now." He didn't stop, didn't even acknowledge the threat, just kept moving until he was right in front of me, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the strain beneath the anger, and then, without warning, without hesitation, he dropped down onto one knee right there on the dirty, oil-stained floor, the impact soft but final, bringing him to my level. His hand reached out, closing around mine, the one still stained with blood, and before I could react, he pressed his face against my palm, his grip tightening slightly, and that's when I felt it, the faint tremor running through him. He was shaking. "I thought you were dead," he said, his voice low, rough, nothing like the controlled tone he always used. "When I jumped in, you weren't there. There was nothing." His words came slower now, heavier, like each one cost him something. "I thought I lost you again." Something warm spread against my skin, and it took me a second to realize what it was. Tears. Ethan Blake was crying. The man everyone called ruthless, unstoppable, was kneeling in front of me with his head bowed, breaking in a way I'd never seen before. "Ryan," he said, lifting his head just enough to meet my eyes, the fury gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. "You win." The words hit harder than any threat he'd ever made. "I won't chase you anymore," he continued, his voice unsteady but firm. "I won't lock you up. I won't stop you." His fingers tightened slightly around mine, like he was afraid I'd disappear again if he let go. "Just don't die." And in that moment, something inside me shifted, not enough to change everything, not enough to erase what had happened, but enough to make it harder to breathe, harder to think, because right then, the child inside me moved sharply, a sudden, unmistakable kick that made me flinch, like it was reacting to him, to this moment, as if it was telling me something I didn't want to hear. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't know what to do next. I was carried onto the aircraft in his arms, no restraints this time, no cuffs biting into my wrists, no collar humming at my throat, just his grip, firm and unyielding, like if he let go for even a second I might disappear again. He wrapped me tightly in a thick wool blanket, pulling me close against his chest, refusing to put me down even as the aircraft lifted smoothly into the storm-dark sky. The cabin lights dimmed automatically as the system switched to autopilot, the destination already set, the top-level specialized care unit at the Federation Central Hospital. I could hear it in the soft voice of the onboard system confirming the route, but I didn't want to go there, couldn't go there. I shifted weakly against him, my fingers curling into the collar of his coat as I forced my voice out. "Don't take me to the hospital." He stiffened slightly, his arms tightening instinctively. "Your injuries," he started, his tone already carrying that familiar edge of control. "Too many people." I cut in, my voice barely more than a breath. "Too many variables." I tilted my head slightly, resting it against him as I forced myself to stay conscious. "My condition, if it's exposed, those genetic research teams won't hesitate. They'll tear me apart just to figure out what I am." The words weren't exaggerated. I'd seen what happened to anomalies, to anything that didn't fit into their controlled system. They didn't treat it as human. They treated it as data. Ethan went silent. For a moment, just long enough that I thought he might refuse anyway. But then I felt the subtle shift as he reached forward, overriding the flight path with a quick command. "Change destination," he said calmly. "Return to private residence." The system acknowledged immediately, adjusting course without question. "We're going home," he added, lowering his head slightly, his lips brushing against my forehead in a brief, almost unconscious gesture. "I've already called in my medical team." The steady release of his pheromones continued, wrapping around me like something tangible, something warm against the cold that had settled deep into my bones. It seeped into me without resistance, easing the tension, calming the instability that had been spiraling out of control. It felt strange, like something frozen inside me was slowly thawing, like a flower blooming under frozen ground. Soft, fragile, but real. It was comforting, dangerously so, to the point where I could feel myself drifting, slipping towards sleep without meaning to. "Ethan," I murmured, my voice distant even to my own ears. Yeah, he responded immediately, his tone softer than usual, like he was anchoring me there, making sure I stayed conscious. If, just hypothetically, I said slowly, my eyes closing despite myself, you could only save one. I paused, the thought forming sluggishly. Me or the baby, which would you choose? His arms tightened around me instantly, the reaction immediate, almost reflexive. That's not a choice, he said, his voice low, firm, like he was rejecting the very premise. You don't get to make that kind of scenario. There was a slight edge to it now, something sharp beneath the surface. I'm not making anything, I murmured faintly, a weak smile tugging at my lips. Just asking. He shifted slightly, adjusting his hold on me as if to reinforce the answer without words. I keep both, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You and the child? I'm not losing either. I let out a quiet, breathless laugh, the sound barely audible over the hum of the aircraft. That's greedy, I muttered. Doesn't exactly follow reality. In my territory, I am reality, he replied without hesitation, resting his chin lightly against the top of my head, his voice lower now, closer. Ryan, you lied to me once already. There was a pause, just long enough for the weight of those words to settle. If you try it again, what then? I asked softly, not even sure why I was pushing him. Maybe because I needed to hear it, needed to know how far he'd go. His grip tightened just slightly, enough that I could feel the tension in him. Then I'll burn this entire world down, he said quietly, but there was nothing uncertain about it. No exaggeration, no dramatics, just a simple, absolute statement. And bury it with you. I went still for a second, because I knew he meant it, knew he was capable of it, and for a moment, that thought should have scared me, but instead, something else settled in my chest, something heavier, something I didn't want to name. You're insane, I muttered, under my breath. But there was no real bite to it, no real resistance left, because despite everything, despite how wrong this all was, I found myself leaning into him slightly, letting my head rest more fully against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the layers of fabric, grounding, constant, and before I could stop myself, before I could overthink it, I let my eyes close completely, letting the exhaustion finally take over, slipping into sleep in the only place that, right now, felt even remotely safe. I spent half a month lying in Ethan Blake's bed, not as a guest, not even as a patient in the normal sense, but something in between, something fragile and dangerous that required constant monitoring. Tubes ran into my body from multiple angles, keeping both me and the life inside me barely stable. Fluids, nutrients, stabilizers, everything carefully controlled, because the genetic collapse hadn't gone away. It had only been suppressed, held back by the sheer intensity of Ethan's pheromones. Like a bomb ticking quietly beneath the surface, ready to go off at any moment. The doctors made that very clear, their solution blunt and clinical. The only viable option was a full remarking, a complete bond to stabilize my system permanently. But the risks were just as clear, maybe worse, because I wasn't a normal case. Secondary differentiation meant my body didn't follow standard rules. My reproductive system was unstable, unpredictable, and during a deep marking, the force of an S-class alpha could overwhelm it completely, leaving me broken beyond recovery, or worse. No. Ethan's voice cut through the room the moment the explanation ended, sharp and absolute. He shoved the doctor back toward the door without hesitation. Find another solution, he snapped. There has to be another way. I watched the whole thing from where I was propped up against the headboard. Casually peeling an apple like this was just another ordinary day. What are you so afraid of? I asked, taking a bite, the crisp sweetness almost jarring against the sterile atmosphere. He stopped mid-step, turning to glare at me like I'd just said something unforgivable. I'm afraid I'll break you, he shot back, his voice tight, barely controlled. That I'll push too far and you won't survive it. I shrugged slightly, unfazed. Better than dying from the collapse, I said lightly. If I'm going out, might as well make it interesting. His expression darkened instantly, veins standing out along his neck as he crossed the room in 2 quick strides, snatching the apple and knife from my hand like I couldn't be trusted with either. Can you take yourself seriously for once? He demanded, frustration bleeding through every word. I looked at him then, really looked, letting the usual half-smile drop. "I am taking this seriously," I said quietly, meeting his gaze head-on. "I know exactly what I'm gambling." There was no humor left in my voice now, just a calm acceptance that had taken me years to reach. "If I win, I get everything, a life, a future. You, the kid," I continued, my tone steady. "If I lose, we both die, and you're free from being stuck taking care of a broken mess for the rest of your life." "Don't say that." He snapped immediately, dropping to his knees beside the bed, grabbing my hand like it was the only thing keeping him grounded, his grip tight, almost desperate. "Don't talk like that." I noticed it again then, the way his eyes had started to betray him lately, red at the edges, like he was constantly on the verge of losing control. He used to never be like this, never let anything show. "All right," I sighed softly, turning my hand to lace my fingers through his, squeezing gently. "I won't say it." There was a brief silence, heavier than anything else in the room, and then I spoke again, quieter this time. "Do you know why I left 3 years ago?" His entire body went still, like the question alone had locked him in place. I held his gaze, not letting him look away. I could already feel it back then. I continued. "The beginning of the collapse." The words came easier than I expected. Maybe because I'd been carrying them for so long. S-class operatives don't last long. You know that. I added, my voice calm, almost detached. 30 years, maybe less. That's the price we pay for what they turned us into. I paused, letting that settle before continuing. "I didn't want you to watch it happen," I said simply. "Didn't want you to see me fall apart piece by piece until I couldn't even hold a weapon anymore." His grip tightened around my hand, but he didn't interrupt, didn't stop me. "I wanted to die on my own terms," I went on. "Somewhere out there, doing something that mattered, not wasting away into something useless." I let out a quiet breath, glancing down briefly at the curve of my abdomen, the one thing that had changed everything. "But I didn't expect this," I admitted. "Didn't expect a reason to keep going." My hand rested lightly over it, the movement instinctive, protective without me even thinking about it. "This kid," I said softly. "It shouldn't work, but it does. Somehow it's balancing everything, holding me together just enough." I looked back at him then, meeting his eyes again. "It's yours," I added, because there was no point hiding it anymore. "Not after everything." "Makes sense, doesn't it?" I murmured, a faint trace of something almost like a smile touching my lips. "Stubborn like you." I leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between us until our foreheads touched, the contact grounding, steady. "I'm not going anywhere yet," I said quietly, "so stop acting like I already am." There was a pause, a moment where neither of us moved, neither of us spoke, and then I shifted just enough to make my intent clear. "Go ahead," I said, my voice low but firm. "Mark me." His breath hitched almost imperceptibly. "That's an order," I added softly, the faintest hint of my old tone slipping through. "And you're supposed to follow orders, Director." I don't know how long it lasted. Time stopped meaning anything somewhere in the middle of it, stretched thin and endless like something being slowly pulled apart. His pheromones filled every inch of the space, dense and overwhelming. That cold, grounded scent pressing down on me until it felt like I couldn't breathe, like I was being buried under frozen earth. And even though he held back as much as he could, even though every movement carried a kind of restraint I had never seen from him before, my body still rejected it violently. Heat spiked uncontrollably, my vision blurred, muscles locking and releasing in waves I couldn't control. Pain surged through me again and again, sharp, relentless, centered deep in my core and radiating outward until there was nowhere left to escape it. My gland burned like it had been branded, like something searing hot was being forced into it, rewriting it from the inside. "It hurts." The words barely made it out, broken and uneven, my voice unfamiliar even to myself. "Hold on. Just a little longer. Ryan, stay with me." His voice stayed close, grounding, steady despite everything. And he didn't stop, didn't pull away, his hands firm but careful, his presence constant as he tried to keep me anchored through the chaos. I could feel it, the effort he was putting into control, into not pushing too far, into making sure I didn't break under it. His lips brushed against my temple, my cheek, my neck, not rushed, not forceful. Just there, over and over, like he was trying to draw my focus away from the pain, like he was trying to remind me I wasn't alone in it. And then it reached that point, the moment where everything tipped over the edge, where the world seemed to collapse inward on itself, the pressure, the heat, the overwhelming force of it all hitting at once. And for a split second it felt like I was being torn apart completely, like there would be nothing left after this. But instead, something else emerged from the wreckage, something unexpected, something steady and unyielding, a connection that snapped into place with a finality I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just physical, it was deeper than that, like two separate things had been forced together until they became one, like roots intertwining beneath the surface where no one could see, locking together so tightly they could never be separated again. I don't know how long it took for everything to settle after that. Minutes, hours. It all blurred together, the storm slowly fading, the intensity receding, until all that was left was exhaustion, my body completely drained, every muscle heavy and unresponsive, sweat clinging to my skin, my breathing uneven as I lay there without the strength to even move my fingers. He was still there, still holding me, his arms wrapped around me like before, his head resting against my shoulder, his breath warm and steady against my neck. And then I felt it. The final shift, sharp but not painful this time, his teeth pressing briefly against the gland at the back of my neck. The last step, the one that sealed everything permanently, the final surge of his pheromones flooding through me, anchoring, stabilizing, binding in a way that couldn't be undone. This was it, the mark that would last beyond everything else. Ryan. His voice came quietly against my ear, softer than I had ever heard it, stripped of everything except certainty. You're mine now. There was no threat in it, no force, just a statement, simple and absolute. This life, the next, and every one after that. My eyes stayed closed, too tired to even respond properly. But I let out a faint breath, something that might have been a laugh, might have been surrender. Yeah, yours. I murmured weakly, the words, slipping out without resistance. And then, almost as an afterthought, barely audible, idiot. And after that, everything finally went quiet as I slipped into unconsciousness. The last thing I felt being his arms still holding me like he wasn't going to let go this time. The first sound that broke through the quiet of early morning was a sharp, unmistakable cry, loud and powerful, cutting through the sterile stillness like a crack of thunder. I lay on the operating table, the anesthesia still dulling my body, but leaving my mind frustratingly clear, aware of everything, every movement, every sound. That's a strong set of lungs, I muttered weakly, my voice barely carrying. Because even without seeing him yet, I could tell that kind of volume didn't come from anything fragile. Ethan stood nearby in sterile gear, holding the newborn in his arms with a stiffness that looked almost unnatural, like he'd been handed something far more dangerous than any weapon he'd ever dealt with. The baby was small, red, wrinkled, nothing like the idealized image people like to imagine. Just a tiny, loud, very real human being. A nurse stepped forward instinctively, hands ready to take over. But one look from Ethan was enough to make her stop in place, retreating a step without a word. He moved closer instead, bringing the child over to me, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it, even compared to the moments when he was making life or death decisions. Ryan, he said, his voice low, careful. Yeah? I answered, barely turning my head. He looks terrible, he said flatly, and for a second I just stared at him, too tired to even process the audacity of that statement. I tried to lift my hand, intending to smack him, but it barely moved an inch before dropping back down. Get lost, I muttered instead, my voice hoarse, and to my surprise, he laughed. Not the quiet, controlled kind I was used to, but something lighter, almost awkward, like he didn't quite remember how to do it properly anymore. It was the first time I'd seen him like that in years. He leaned down slightly, carefully bringing the baby closer so I could see him better. And yeah, he wasn't exactly impressive to look at, small, flushed, eyes still closed. But there was something familiar already, something in the shape of his features that was unmistakable. Name him, Ethan said after a moment, his tone shifting back to something steadier. I thought about it for a second, longer than I probably needed to. Call him Lucas. Cole, I said finally, the name settling naturally this time. Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. Cole, he repeated. You carried him. I replied simply. That makes sense. He studied me for a moment, then nodded without arguing. Fine, he said. Lucas Cole. There was a pause. Then he added, almost as if testing the idea, what about a nickname? I gave him a look immediately, already suspicious. Don't ruin it, I warned. What? He said, feigning innocence again. I was thinking something meaningful. I exhaled slowly, already regretting asking. Go on then. I muttered. Coin, he said without hesitation, holding up the small metal piece between his fingers like evidence. Because of this, I stared at him for a second, then huffed a quiet laugh despite myself. You've got no sense of naming, I said, shaking my head. It's better than what you'd come up with, he shot back, clearly unbothered, then added, his tone turning slightly more deliberate. Or bite. I frowned slightly. Bite? Yeah, he said, his gaze flicking briefly toward me, something unreadable passing through his eyes. Because he's proof you left a mark I'll never get rid of? I went quiet for a second, then rolled my eyes, though I didn't argue. Fine, I muttered. Coin or bite? That's what we're going with. That's what we're going with, he confirmed. And just like that, it stuck. Time moved on faster than I expected after that. 3 years passing in what felt like a blur of adjustments, recovery, and learning how to live with something neither of us had planned for. The nights became quieter, the chaos more manageable, and eventually, normal in its own strange way. Now the evening air was cool, carrying a faint breeze that cut through the lingering warmth of the day. I leaned back against the balcony chair, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the scene below on the lawn. It was less of a game and more of a one-sided takeover. Lucas, now 3 years old and already far too confident for his size, was perched on Ethan's back, gripping onto him like he was riding something far more impressive than the most feared man in the Federation. Faster. Lucas shouted, laughing, waving a toy blaster in one hand. Ethan, for his part, was actually playing along, moving across the grass with exaggerated effort, even making half-hearted sounds that might have been meant to resemble a horse. It was ridiculous, completely absurd, and yet somehow it worked. I took a slow sip from my glass, unable to stop the slight smile forming at the corner of my mouth. My body still wasn't fully back to what it used to be, but the genetic condition had stabilized. Controlled, no longer the ticking bomb it once was. I was still S-class, technically, just with a very different set of priorities now. Ethan suddenly looked up, his gaze finding me immediately despite the distance. And even from here, I could feel it, that warmth in his expression, something that only ever showed when he looked at me. He handed Lucas off to one of the staff members and crossed the distance in just a few quick movements, stepping onto the balcony like it was nothing. Sneaking. Drinks again? He asked, already reaching for the glass. It's one sip, I protested lightly. Doctor said it helps circulation. Which doctor? He shot back, downing the rest of the wine without hesitation. I'll shut their entire department down tomorrow. I rolled my eyes, but didn't argue further as he bent down, lifting me effortlessly from the chair like it was routine. What are you doing? I asked, though I already had a feeling. Kid's asleep. He replied simply, his tone shifting slightly, something deeper settling in. Time for something else. He carried me inside without waiting for a response, the atmosphere changing the moment we stepped into the quieter space of the room. You realize you're still overdramatic, I muttered, wrapping an arm loosely around his neck. And you're still reckless, he countered, setting me down carefully before leaning in closer, his gaze steady, focused. Do you still have it? I asked suddenly, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He didn't need clarification. His hand reached under the pillow, pulling out the coin I'd left behind all those years ago, holding it up between his fingers like it was something far more valuable than it looked. Still here, he said quietly. I let out a soft breath, something easing in my chest. This time, he added, his voice lowering slightly as he leaned in. I'm not taking payment. There was a brief pause, his lips brushing against mine, his words softer now, almost lost in the moment. I want the rest of your life instead. And for once, I didn't argue. The mission was supposed to be routine, or at least as routine as anything ever got for people like us. High-risk containment, a rogue biotech lab on the edge of a restricted industrial zone. The kind of place that didn't officially exist, but still managed to cause very real problems. Intelligence had flagged unstable experimental compounds, illegal gene modifications, the kind of mess that could spiral out of control if left unchecked. So naturally, they sent us. I stood at the edge of the rooftop, the city lights stretching out beneath us in fractured patterns, wind tugging at my jacket as I checked the final readouts on my wrist device. You ready? Ethan's voice came through the comm, low and steady. I didn't need to look to know exactly where he was, just a few feet behind me. Always close enough to intervene, always within range. Since when do you ask that? I replied, glancing over my shoulder. He was already watching me. That same focused expression he always wore before a mission, sharp, calculating. But there was something else there too now, something quieter, something that hadn't been there years ago. Since you started doing reckless things without backup, he said dryly. I huffed a quiet laugh, shaking my head. You're literally my backup. Exactly, he replied. Like that settled it. I turned back toward the building ahead, its structure dark and silent, but I knew better. Places like this were never empty. In and out, I said, more to myself than him. Secure the data, shut it down. No unnecessary complications. You're terrible at avoiding complications, he muttered, and I ignored him, because we both knew he wasn't wrong. The infiltration went smoothly at first, too smoothly. We bypassed the outer security without triggering alarms, slipped through corridors that should have been heavily guarded but weren't, and that alone was enough to put me on edge. Something's off, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper as we moved deeper into the facility. I know, Ethan replied immediately, his hand hovering near his sidearm. Too quiet. We reached the central lab without resistance. The doors already unlocked, lights flickering faintly overhead, casting uneven shadows across the room. This is wrong, I murmured, stepping inside cautiously, my instincts screaming at me to stop, to turn back. But it was already too late. The moment we crossed the threshold, the entire room lit up, alarms blaring as heavy doors slammed shut behind us, sealing us in ambush. Ethan said sharply, already moving, pulling me back just as the first automated turret activated, gunfire erupting in controlled bursts. We split instantly, diving for cover behind overturned workstations. You always pick the best missions, I muttered under my breath, returning fire to disable the nearest unit. You came willingly, he shot back, his voice calm despite the chaos. More turrets activated, angles overlapping, forcing us to move constantly to avoid getting pinned down. There's a central control system, I said quickly, scanning the room. If we take it out, everything shuts down, then find it. Ethan replied, already drawing attention away from me, moving into the open deliberately, his presence pulling fire toward him, giving me the opening I needed. I didn't hesitate, sprinting across the room, weaving through debris and incoming fire, my focus narrowing onto the terminal at the far end. Just a little further, I could almost reach it. And then the floor shifted beneath me, a concealed panel dropping away as I lost my footing, falling hard into the lower level, pain flaring through my already injured leg as I hit the ground. Ryan. Ethan's voice cut through the noise, sharp, urgent. I pushed myself up immediately, ignoring the protest from my body. I'm fine, I called back. Even though that was only partially true, the lower level was worse, tighter space, more confined, and filled with something else, containment units, experimental subjects, unstable and dangerous. Of course you are, Ethan muttered over the comm, but I could hear the tension there, the shift in his breathing. He was already moving, already coming. After me, don't, I snapped. Stay up there, I'll handle this side. Not happening, he replied instantly, and seconds later he dropped down beside me, landing smoothly despite the height. His presence immediate, solid. We moved together, he said, like it wasn't even up for discussion. I didn't argue. There wasn't time. The system was down here. I could feel it, the hum of it, hidden behind reinforced panels. But we weren't alone. The containment units started to fail one by one. Whatever had been held inside now free, unpredictable, aggressive. Great, I muttered, raising my weapon again. Just what we needed. Focus, Ethan said, stepping slightly in front of me, positioning himself between me and the nearest threat, his movements precise, controlled. We fought our way forward, covering each other without needing to think about it. Years of experience moving in sync, instinct guiding every action. But the pressure kept building, more threats emerging, the system locking down. Further, "I've got the terminal," I called out as I finally reached it, my fingers moving quickly over the interface, bypassing security protocols, forcing access. "Give me 30 seconds. You've got 20. Ethan replied, his tone sharper now, something changing in the rhythm of the fight. I didn't question it, just worked faster, pushing through the last layer of encryption, and then I saw it, the failsafe. A built-in detonation sequence tied to the system, already counting down. "Ethan," I said, my voice tightening slightly. "We've got a problem. Define problem. Whole place is rigged to blow," I said flatly. "Timer's already running." There was a brief pause, just long enough for him to process it. "Can you stop it?" he asked. "Working on it," I replied, forcing my focus back onto the screen. But the system was fighting me. Layers of protection, designed specifically to prevent interference. The countdown continued, relentless. "Time?" he asked. "Less than a minute," I answered, my jaw tightening. I pushed harder, overriding safeguards, forcing entry, and then something shifted, the system resisting less, like it had been designed to allow this at the last possible moment. A trap within a trap. I didn't like it, but I didn't have a choice. "Almost there," I said, just as something moved in my peripheral vision, too fast to fully register. Ethan reacted before I could, stepping in, blocking the incoming strike meant for me, the impact hitting him instead, hard enough to send him crashing back against the wall. "Ethan," I snapped, my focus breaking for a split second. "Finish it," he barked, already pushing himself back up despite the hit, his voice leaving no room for hesitation. I turned back to the console immediately, forcing the final override, the system flickering, resisting, and then finally, it gave. The countdown froze, then reset, the detonation sequence aborted, the entire facility powering down in one cascading failure. Silence replacing the chaos almost instantly. I exhaled sharply, tension draining from my body as I turned back toward him. He was still standing, barely, one hand braced against the wall, breathing heavier than before, but alive. "You okay?" I asked, crossing the distance quickly. He let out a short breath, something that might have been a laugh. "I've had worse," he said, even though the strain in his voice said otherwise. I reached out without thinking, steadying him, my hand gripping his arm. "You didn't have to take that hit," I muttered. "Yeah, I did," he replied simply, meeting my gaze. No hesitation, no doubt, just certainty, the kind that had always defined him. And for a second, neither of us moved, the silence settling around us in a way that felt different now, heavier but not oppressive. "We're getting out of here," I said finally, breaking it. He nodded once, pushing himself upright. "Together," he added, like it was the only option. And this time, I didn't argue, because I didn't need to. We made it out before the secondary systems could trigger anything else, the night air hitting us as we stepped back onto the rooftop. The city still there, still intact, like nothing had happened, but everything felt different, quieter, steadier. I glanced at him briefly, then away. "Next time," I said, my voice lighter now. "You let me handle it." He huffed a quiet breath, shaking his head slightly. "Not a chance." And for once, I didn't push back, because I already knew the answer, and maybe, just maybe, I didn't mind it as much as I used to. Teaching a kid should have been simple. At least that's what I used to think before reality proved otherwise, because raising Lucas turned out to be a mission more unpredictable than anything we'd ever faced in the field. One evening, the three of us were out on the training lawn behind the estate, the sun just starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grass. Lucas stood in front of us with a toy blaster in his hand, his stance wide and serious in a way that would have been intimidating if he wasn't barely tall enough to reach my waist. "Again," he said, his voice firm with determination. I leaned back against the railing nearby, arms crossed, watching with mild amusement. "You've been at this for an hour," I pointed out. "Even elite operatives take breaks. I'm not tired." He shot back immediately, stubborn as ever, and I didn't need to guess where he got that from. Ethan stood a few steps away, posture straight, eyes focused, treating this like an actual training session instead of a game. Grip's too loose, he said calmly, stepping forward to adjust Lucas's hands on the toy. If you don't control it, it controls you. Lucas frowned, concentrating harder. Like this. Better. Ethan nodded once, approval brief but genuine. I rolled my eyes slightly, pushing myself off the railing. He's 3, not joining a tactical unit tomorrow, I said dryly. Ethan didn't even look at me. Discipline starts early, he replied. Lucas fired the toy blaster again, the harmless stream hitting its target with surprising accuracy this time. His face lighting up instantly. I did it, he shouted, turning to look at us. I couldn't help the small smile that slipped through, even if I tried to hide it. Ethan reached out, resting a hand briefly on Lucas's head. Not quite a pat, but close enough. You did, he said, and there was something unmistakably softer in his tone, something that only ever showed up around us. All right, I said, stepping in, crouching down to Lucas's level. My turn, he looked at me immediately, eyes bright with curiosity. What are you teaching me? Something your dad's terrible at, I replied, glancing up just long enough to catch Ethan's narrowed look. Improvisation. Lucas tilted his head slightly. What's that? It means, I said, picking up a small object from the ground and tossing it lightly in my hand. When things don't go the way you expect, you don't freeze, you adapt. I flicked the object toward him without warning, not hard, just enough to catch him off guard. He fumbled for a second, then caught it, surprised but grinning. Again, he said immediately, and just like that, the session shifted, less structured, more unpredictable. I threw things at different angles, different speeds, forcing him to react, to think, to adjust. Ethan watched from the side at first, arms crossed, analyzing, but I could tell he was paying attention, really paying attention. After a while, Lucas stumbled, missing a catch and dropping to the ground, frustration flashing across his face. I can't do it, he muttered. I stepped closer, kneeling beside him. Yeah, you can, I said simply. You just did it 5 times in a row, but I messed up, he insisted. I shrugged slightly. So what? He blinked at me, clearly not expecting that answer. You think I've never messed up? I continued, my tone steady. You think your dad hasn't? Lucas glanced toward Ethan instinctively, and for a moment, there was silence. Then Ethan stepped forward, his expression unreadable as always. He has, he said calmly, and I turned to look at him, surprised he'd admit that out loud. Lucas looked between us, processing, then slowly nodded, determination settling back into his expression. Again, he said, pushing himself back up. I smirked slightly, stepping back into position. That's more like it. The training continued until the sky darkened completely, until Lucas was finally too tired to keep going, his movements slowing, his energy fading. Ethan picked him up without a word when he started to sway, holding him securely against his shoulder. Lucas barely protested before his eyes started to close. You pushed him hard, Ethan said quietly as we walked back toward the house. So did you, I replied, glancing at him. He didn't deny it, just adjusted his hold slightly, making sure Lucas was comfortable. We reached the balcony, the same place I used to stand alone, watching the world from a distance. But now it felt different, fuller. I leaned against the railing again, watching as Ethan carried Lucas inside. Something warm settling in my chest, something steady and unfamiliar in the best way. He came back a few minutes later, stepping out onto the balcony beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. He's asleep, he said. I nodded slightly, taking a slow breath of the cool night air. We're doing all right, I said after a moment, not really asking, just stating it out loud. Ethan glanced at me, then out at the city beyond. Yeah, he replied quietly, and for once, there was no tension, no danger, no unfinished business hanging over us. Just this, a rare, fragile kind of peace that neither of us had ever expected to have. But somehow, against all odds, we'd found it anyway. And this time, neither of us was letting it go. I tilted my head slightly, glancing at him from the corner of my eye, a faint smirk tugging at my lips. You know, I said casually. He's doing pretty well. Ethan hummed in agreement. He is. I took a slow breath, then added like it was nothing. We could probably handle another one. There was a brief pause, the kind that stretched just long enough to be noticeable. Ethan turned his head slowly to look at me, his expression unreadable for half a second before something shifted, something sharper, more intent. "Is that a suggestion?" he asked quietly. I shrugged lightly, pretending indifference. "Just an observation." He stepped closer, closing the small distance between us until there was barely any space left, his hand coming up to rest at my waist, steady, certain. "Then I agree," he said, his voice lower now, carrying that familiar edge that always meant he'd already made up his mind. My smirk widened slightly. "Of course you do," I muttered, but I didn't step away, didn't resist when he pulled me closer, because some things didn't need to be argued anymore. The night stretched on around us, quiet and endless. And this time, there was no running, no fear, no unfinished past waiting to catch up, just the two of us, standing there with a future that, for once, felt entirely within reach.